It was a small village, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, isolated from the rest of the world. Life in the village was simple, and the people lived in harmony with nature and each other. But there was one place the villagers avoided at all costs: a well, located at the edge of the forest. The well was ancient, its stone crumbling and covered in moss, and a dark presence seemed to linger around it. The legend of the well went back generations. Villagers whispered that it was cursed, that anyone who peered into its depths would be haunted by something terrible. According to the elders, years ago, a woman had thrown herself into the well in a fit of despair, and her vengeful spirit remained, pulling others into her misery. Her soul, trapped in the darkness of the well, sought company in her eternal torment. Despite the warnings, a young girl named Alara, drawn by curiosity, couldn't resist the allure of the well. She had heard the stories, of course, but she didn't believe in curses or ghosts. To her, the well was just a relic of the past, nothing more than an old stone structure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, Alara sneaked out of her house and made her way to the edge of the forest. The air was cool, and an eerie silence hung over the land, broken only by the occasional call of an owl. She approached the well cautiously, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. The closer she got, the more the air seemed to thicken, pressing down on her, as if something unseen were watching. Standing before the well, she peered into its depths. The darkness was absolute, swallowing the faint light from the moon. She couldn't see the bottom, but she could feel something down there, something cold and angry. A chill ran down her spine, and she started to turn away, but a soft whisper stopped her in her tracks. ELARA ... She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The voice was faint, barely audible, but it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, had called her name. She looked around, but there was no one there. The village was far behind her, and the forest was silent. ELARA ... double quotes. The voice came again, louder this time, echoing up from the well. It was a woman's voice, filled with sadness and longing. Alara felt a strange pull, an urge to look down into the darkness once more. She leaned over the edge, straining to see, and that's when she saw a pale face, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile, staring up at her from the depths. Alara gasped, stumbling back, but she couldn't look away. The face rose slowly, as if floating upward, growing clearer with each passing second. The woman's hair was long and matted, her skin pale and sickly, her eyes empty and lifeless. She reached out a bony hand, her fingers long and thin, like the branches of a dead tree. Come ... join me ... double quotes, the woman whispered, her voice low and hypnotic. Alara tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. Her body felt frozen, paralyzed by an invisible force. She could feel the woman's cold presence pressing against her, filling her mind with dark thoughts, despair, and hopelessness. It was as if the woman's sorrow was consuming her, pulling her into a void of darkness. The woman's hand reached the edge of the well, her fingers curling over the stones, and Alara knew that if she touched her, she would be lost forever. Summoning every ounce of strength she had, she broke free from the woman's gaze and stumbled backward, her heart racing. She turned and ran, not daring to look back, the woman's voice echoing in her mind, calling her name over and over. Alara made it back to the village, but she was never the same. She was haunted by the woman's face, her voice, her touch. Every night, she would wake up in a cold sweat, the woman's whispers filling her ears. She tried to tell the villagers, but they dismissed her story, saying it was just a bad dream. But Alara knew the truth. She had looked into the depths of the cursed well, and something had looked back. The woman was inside her mind, her spirit bound to Alara, feeding off her fear and despair. And as the days passed, Alara grew weaker, her skin pale and her eyes hollow, until one night, she disappeared from her bed, leaving no trace behind. The villagers searched for her, but they knew where she had gone. The well, the cursed well at the edge of the forest, had claimed another soul. And now, they say, if you stand by the well on a quiet night, you can hear her voice, calling out from the darkness, beckoning others to join her in eternal misery. The village of Blackwood was a quiet place, surrounded by sprawling wheat fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. During harvest season, the villagers would gather in the fields, working from dawn until dusk to bring in the crop. The wheat fields were their livelihood, a golden sea that fed the village and kept it thriving. But there was a darker story attached to those fields, one that was passed down through generations, whispered among the villagers. They called it the phantom of the wheat fields, a figure that appeared during the late harvest nights, moving silently through the tall stalks of wheat, its form barely visible against the darkened sky. Some claimed to have seen its ghostly silhouette wandering among the crops, while others reported hearing a faint, mournful wail that sent chills down their spines. The legend told of a young man named Elias, a farmhand who had once worked in the fields. Many years ago, Elias had been caught in a terrible storm while trying to finish the harvest. The rain came down in torrents, and the winds howled like demons. Elias had struggled to make it back to the village, but he never returned. His body was found days later, buried under broken stalks of wheat, his face twisted in horror. Since that day, villagers believed that his spirit wandered the fields, searching for something he had lost, never able to rest. One late October night, a young man named Thomas, new to the village and unfamiliar with its legends, volunteered to finish the last harvest shift. He had heard the stories of the phantom but brushed them off as superstitions. He was a skeptic and had little patience for ghost tales. To him, the phantom was nothing more than a myth. The sky was darkening as he made his way into the fields, the cool autumn air carrying a faint chill. The wheat rustled around him, whispering secrets as the wind swept through the stalks. Thomas worked quickly, wanting to finish before night fully descended. But, as he moved deeper into the fields, a strange feeling began to creep over him, an odd sensation, as if he were being watched. He shrugged it off, trying to focus on the task at hand. But then he heard a faint, mournful wail, carried on the wind. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, filling the air with a sorrowful, haunting melody. Thomas stopped, his heart pounding. He scanned the fields, but there was nothing there. Just the endless sea of wheat, swaying gently in the breeze. Probably just the wind, he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the unease. But as he turned to continue his work, he saw something, a figure, standing a few rows away, barely visible among the tall stalks. It was a shadowy form, its features obscured, but there was something undeniably human about it. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching him. Thomas called out, thinking it might be another villager, but there was no response. The figure remained silent and still, its presence chilling. A wave of fear washed over him, and he took a step back, unsure of what to do. The figure shifted slightly, its form flickering in the dim light, and then it began to move toward him, gliding silently through the wheat. Thomas turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. The wheat stalks seemed to close in around him, the path he had come through vanishing as he sprinted through the field. The wailing grew louder, filling his ears, drowning out his thoughts. He could feel the phantom behind him, its cold, dark presence pressing down on him, suffocating him with fear. He stumbled, falling to his knees, the wheat closing in around him like a prison. He could feel the phantom's gaze on him, could hear its mournful wail, a cry of despair and longing. Desperately, he scrambled to his feet, but the phantom was there, standing just a few feet away, its hollow eyes staring into his soul. "Why did you leave me?" A voice whispered, faint and distant, filled with sorrow and anger. Thomas felt a cold hand grip his shoulder, a touch that sent ice through his veins. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The phantom leaned closer, its hollow eyes empty and haunting, its face twisted in grief and pain. You left me ... to die ... With a final burst of strength, Thomas broke free from the phantom's grasp and ran, his mind racing, his heart pounding. He didn't stop until he was back at the village, gasping for breath, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. The villagers found him trembling, barely able to speak, his mind broken by what he had seen. From that day on, Thomas was never the same. He wandered the village in a daze, his once strong spirit shattered, his eyes haunted by the memory of the phantom. The villagers whispered that he had been marked, that the phantom of the wheat fields had claimed him as its own. And every harvest season, when the sun set over the golden fields, the villagers would hear the mournful wail of the phantom, searching for its lost soul, wandering the wheat fields in eternal sorrow, waiting for someone else to join it in the darkness. The village of Hollow Brook was a small, tightly knit community where everyone knew each other, and secrets rarely stayed hidden. But there was one dark legend that even the oldest villagers dared not speak of openly, the legend of the lost children. It was said that deep within the woods surrounding the village, an ancient spirit dwelled, known as the Wraith of Hollow Brook, a vengeful entity that preyed upon children who wandered too far into the forest. The story went back centuries. According to the legend, the Wraith had once been a mother who had lost her children in the forest. They had wandered off, lured by the strange, enchanting songs that drifted through the trees, and they were never seen again. The woman had searched desperately, calling their names, but her cries went unanswered. Driven mad by grief, she ventured into the forest alone, seeking to find them, but she too disappeared. Her spirit, consumed by sorrow and anger, became the Wraith, and ever since, it was said that she roamed the woods, luring other children to their doom, eternally seeking to replace the ones she had lost. One chilly autumn evening, 3 children from the village, Lena, Paul, and little Clara, were playing near the edge of the forest. Their parents had warned them not to go too far, but curiosity got the best of them. As the sun began to set, casting eerie shadows across the land, they heard a soft, melodic singing, drifting through the trees. The children stopped, entranced by the haunting melody. It was unlike anything they had ever heard, beautiful and sorrowful, a song that seemed to call to them, beckoning them deeper into the forest. Without thinking, they followed the sound, drawn by a force they couldn't understand. The trees grew denser as they walked, the air colder, but they couldn't turn back. As they ventured further, Lena began to feel uneasy. She glanced around, realizing that they were far from the village. The familiar landmarks nowhere in sight. The shadows grew longer, and the trees seemed to close in around them, creating a twisted labyrinth of branches and roots. She tried to speak, to tell the others that they should turn back, but the song grew louder, drowning out her voice. Then, they saw her, a figure in the distance, barely visible through the mist. She was tall and thin, her hair long and wild, her face hidden in shadow. She moved gracefully, gliding through the trees, her movements smooth and unnatural. The children stopped, frozen in fear, but the figure continued to sing, her voice soft and mournful, calling to them. Clara, the youngest, took a step forward, as if in a trance. Lena grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but Clara's eyes were glazed, her face blank, as though she couldn't hear or feel anything. The woman's voice grew softer, a whisper that seemed to wrap around them, filling their ears with promises of warmth and safety, of a place where they would never feel alone. Paul tried to pull both girls back, his heart pounding with terror, but the woman's gaze turned toward him, her eyes dark and hollow, filled with an endless sorrow. She reached out a hand, her fingers long and bony, like the branches of a dead tree, beckoning them closer. Her mouth twisted into a sad smile, her voice low and pleading. Come ... join me ... double quotes. The children stumbled backward, fear finally breaking the spell that had held them captive. They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing through the silent forest, the woman's voice fading into a distant wail. The trees seemed to close in around them, blocking their path, but they pushed forward, desperate to escape. The sun had set, and the darkness pressed down on them, filling them with the terror they had never known. Finally, they burst through the edge of the forest, stumbling back into the village. They were shaking, their faces pale, and they could barely speak, but their parents understood. They had heard the story before, of the wraith and her haunting song, and they knew what the children had seen. From that day on, the children were never the same. They were haunted by the woman's face, her hollow eyes, and her mournful song. They would wake in the middle of the night, hearing her voice calling to them, beckoning them back to the forest. And as they grew older, they felt the pull of the forest, a strange, irresistible urge to return to the place where the wraith waited. In time, Lena, Paul, and Clara left the village, each one disappearing into the woods, never to be seen again. And the villagers knew that the wraith had claimed them, luring them back to her side, forever bound to her sorrow. To this day, on quiet autumn nights, the villagers say you can hear the wraith's song drifting through the trees, a sad, haunting melody that calls to the young and the lost, a reminder of the children who disappeared, and the mother who still wanders, searching for the souls she lost so long ago.